Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. My name's Mike. I'm a project coordinator here with Africa Fire Mission. So happy you took time out of your schedules to come and join us for today's online virtual training session. Today, we're going to be talking about wildland fire tools or bushfire tools or whatever you may call those in your local areas. If you stick around, for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 or 45 minutes, you'll receive a certificate of attendance for today's training. Later on, after we conclude class, I'll post a couple links in the chat where you can get to our Google Drive and you can get materials from today's presentation or rewatch it if you have some network issues or something. So you can still earn that certificate at a later date if you need to. Before we get started, I'm going to pass things over to Jose, who is AFM's fire safety advocate, for a couple words of encouragement.
Thank you, Chief Mike. I'm really happy that you may have joined us today, and you for finding time to sacrifice your bundles, even for self-development. We don't take this for granted. Well, I don't want to take so long. Today, I'm still on the subject of encouraging people, because I've noticed that so much of us in the fire service, especially here in Africa, we tend not to be encouraged. Yeah. So you find somebody has come in your office or at the workplace and they're really feeling dejected and really laid back. Yeah. So I want to give you some few phrases that, of course, I grabbed it from the internet. I have to be honest with you, because I was looking at which are the phrases that you can get to encourage somebody. And these are the phrases that I got. Yeah. One of them is hang in there. Tell them, hey, you know what, brother, you know what, sister, hang in there. Keep them encouraged in terms of telling them that whatever they're doing right. Yeah. Also use the phrases like, hey, don't give up. Don't give up. You're so important to this service and you're doing a great service, even though people don't see. God is seeing, and we are grateful to have you in our team. So please do not give up. Another one is keep pushing. I know this is quite difficult, especially that sometimes in our city councils or county councils, people don't really appreciate us. You're trying to push for fire prevention. Your officer says, no, you're not authorized. You're not in that department. You're in another department in the firehouse. Keep pushing. Yeah. Another one is stay strong. Yeah. Stay strong in the service. Another one is never give up. I always do that myself, because sometimes I might be going here in Mathare and I find people, the same house I told them not to use an authorized illegal connection, I'm finding a whole wire has gone inside their house and it is all naked. It really makes me feel so bad. I'm like, what am I going to do? So I feel that I never give up. That and more, you can always go on the Google and just type there words of encouragement to give to somebody, and you'll find a whole list. Thank you for listening, and don't give up. Carry on. Back to you, Chief Mike.
Thanks, Jose. We appreciate all of the work that you do, encouraging, supporting the firefighters in all of Africa. It's really great. We really appreciate it. With that, I think we're going to get started here today. Just as a little bit of an introduction, the lesson that we're going to use for today is designed for wildland firefighting in the western half of the United States. Now, this is a training program that we use throughout the whole United States. But where I'm at on the East Coast, some of the stuff doesn't necessarily apply. It's more centered for the sort of western half of the U.S. And the reason I say that is that some of the things that you see won't necessarily apply. And for this whole month, we're going to be talking about these concepts. And while things may look a little different, they're still going to apply to your situation there in Africa. So, we call this wildland fire. I've heard it referred to, as a bushfire. Here in the US, we used to call them forest fires. So the name has sort of changed, but we're talking about fire, in vegetation that may threaten, a village or threaten homes or something to that effect. But that's the type of fire that we're talking about. And today we're going to focus on tools. Another word about the presentation that we're going to do, this comes from a group called the National Wildland Coordinating Group. And this is a group here in the US that really sets the standard for how to fight fire, wildland fire here in the US. The great thing about this group is that if you go to their website, you can access these classes, these lessons. This comes from the Introduction to Wildland Firefighting. The course number is S130. We're doing chapter 8, unit 8 in it today about tools. But you can actually get online and find the entire presentation for all the classes for this course. You can actually take this course online. You won't receive a certificate for the 130 course because there is a field day that's required. But you can still suck up all that knowledge and gather all that knowledge. So after we get finished here, I'll provide some links to where you can find this stuff. So without further ado, we're going to start our presentation here. And we're talking about tools and equipment. One of the things that I want to emphasize here is that as we think about how we're going to try to stop these bushfires or these vegetation fires, we're going to talk about tools. And a lot of the tools that I show, you may not have access to, and they may not be available to you. But what I want you to do is, as you're watching this presentation, I want you to look at these tools and think about what tools do you have that are very similar to these, or what can you do to modify a tool that you have available to you to make it work the same way these tools do. And the other thing I want you to think about is I want you to think about agriculture. As we try to stop a wildland fire, this week we're not really talking about how to stop the fire. We're just talking about the tools that we would use and how to maintain those tools. But as we talk about it, imagine that you've got some area with some type of vegetation that's grown up, and you want to clear that area to plant something. Whatever tools that you use to prepare the land for planting are going to be perfect tools to use to fight wildland fire. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Basically, we're taking, and it's the same thing we're doing here. These are agricultural tools that have been modified to use as a fire tool. So keep that in mind as we work our way through the program here. These courses all start with, objectives as to what, we want you to learn. I'm not too worried about these, be able to identify some tools, great. Choosing a tool for a specific task based on the fuel type and the ground cover, that's a little bit more important. We'll kind of focus on that a little bit. And the big one, how do you do field maintenance? How do you sharpen, stuff like that? When should you take a tool out of service? We'll talk about that as well. This course, this particular unit that I'm doing, typically when I teach this here at home, we're not doing the slideshow presentation. We're doing this out in the field with the actual tools and demonstrating the tools in hand. Obviously, we can't do that in this format. So we'll talk about, how to carry the tools, how to pass the tools, spacing, that sort of stuff as well. So the first type of tool that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about cutting tools. And what do we use a cutting tool for? You can see the slide there. We're using it for cutting brush, for trees, grubbing. And what we mean by grubbing is sort of turning over the soil, digging up the soil, loosening up the soil, digging trenches, basically removing vegetation that's covering the ground. If a cutting tool should be well maintained, it should have a sharp edge. That's what the one thing that I'm going to constantly reiterate with each type of tool is sharpen it, sharpen it, sharpen it. Working with a dull tool is more dangerous than working with a sharp tool. When we have a tool with a sharp edge on it, we have to be cautious of that sharp edge, but it takes less effort to do the task that we're trying to do. If it's nice and sharp, it uses less energy. It's much more efficient. So we want to keep those tools nice and sharp. And as we use those tools, we'll become more efficient using them, right? So first tool, we're looking at what we would call a single bit axe. It's got a couple of different parts to it. Obviously, we've got the handle, we've got the head, the eye. This part right here is the eye, sort of a dual purpose tool. We can use the cutting edge down here to cut things. We can use the flat side on the back as a hammer for various uses, for breaking up maybe some stumps that are in the ground or something like that. So fairly versatile tool. We can use that for dealing with heavier items. One of the things I want to mention, if you use a single bit axe like this, or if we're talking structure firefighting, we call this a flathead axe. If you use it like a hammer, what can happen is this eye can, the metal can begin to deform, and that will loosen the head. So it's important that we keep that head tight. You can see there's a pin or a rivet driven through here to try to keep that head tight. You can also add a wedge, a thin wooden wedge into the top of the handle here to tighten that up. So sort of maintenance of this thing, we want to keep the handle nice and smooth. We want to run our hands up and down the handle, feeling for rough spots, smooth those rough spots with a sharp knife edge or with some sandpaper. It'd be nice to put a thin coat of oil on the handle after we've smoothed it. Typically here we use a boiled linseed oil. If there's some sort of an oil that you typically use to treat wood, that's what I'd recommend that you use for that handle. And then we want to keep that head, a light coat of oil on the head to protect it from rusting. And we're going to keep that head sharp. So we want about, maybe like a 2.5 inch taper. So what's my conversion there? Probably like 5 or 6 centimeter taper off of the edge with a nice even bevel to keep that tool sharp and well maintained. This next tool that we have here is called a Pulaski, and this one's a little bit more useful than that single bit axe. The difference being down here on the bottom, we have this grubbing end or this sort of digging piece that's added onto here. So as you're looking at this, do you have a tool like this that's available locally? If it's not, do you have some type of axe that you can add a piece on the back to use as a digging tool? So this is named after Ed Pulaski. In the United States back in the early 1900s, there were major fires burning all across the western part of the state. And he was one of the first employees of the United States Forest Service, wildland firefighter type people. We led a crew save their lives by making them climb into a cave while the fire burnt over top of them. And he sat at the entrance to the cave and threatened to shoot any of his crew members if they tried to leave. And the fire burnt over top of them. And he was injured pretty badly because he was at the front of the cave, but the rest of his crew was saved. So we named this tool after him, Pulaski tool. Maintenance is the same with the handle, the same way we want to keep the handle nice and smooth, the same way we want to sharpen and maintain this edge here. Now, on the back side of the Pulaski, this back edge here, we want that to be a short little bevel with about a 45-degree angle. We want to sharpen that too. And keeping that edge nice and sharp will help us to cut through any roots that may be grown down under the surface of the soil, so that we can remove all of the vegetation that's in the way that's burning. The next tool we've got here, I would call it an adze or just a hoe. We've got a nice long handle so we can stand fairly upright, and then it's got this sort of big, wide, grubbing end on it that lets us, once again, we're going to keep that edge nice and sharp. It keeps, it's nice and wide. So it lets us do a lot of digging. It lets us do a lot of cutting of vegetation. We can cut the tops off of vegetation, rake and pull them away. I've seen, various forms of this tool being used throughout Africa. It doesn't necessarily look sort of as fancy as this, but I know, you guys have access to these. You may not think of it as a fire tool, but it's a great one. So what do you have locally that you can grab there? As we talk about how to maintain these, as we're looking the tools over, as we're looking at the handle, right? What are we looking for in our handle? We're looking to see if there's any big cracks in it. Are there any deep cuts or gouges in it? How tight is the head on the top of the tool? What can we do to tighten that head up on the tool? We use wooden wedges. We'll drive a wooden wedge in there. Sometimes we have these small little metal wedges that we can drive into the top of the head to try to expand that wood a little bit and make the head tighter. I'm sure that there's techniques that you all would use on a farming tool to try to tighten up the head so the head isn't loose and doesn't go flying off. So whatever you might do for that. As you're looking at the cutting edge, you're looking for any chips or nicks or chunks that are taken out of that cutting edge, maybe from striking a rock or a stone. If you find those, we're just going to use a file. We're going to take a flat file, and we're going to use a flat file. You can see down here in the bottom of this picture, you notice how he's sitting on the ground here, okay? And he's got one leg sort of tucked underneath of himself. And the handle of that tool, he actually has underneath of his right leg out there. So he's got the tool head resting on his left knee, and he's using his right leg to hold that handle down. So he's got that he's got that tool just clamped down right in his lap, and he's got a wide file. Here we would call that a bastard file. I don't know what you would call that file. He's using this top hand with his hand wide open, putting some pressure down on that file, and just doing long, smooth strokes the entire length of the file to maintain that edge on your cutting tool. Whatever cutting tool there is, you're going to maintain that same angle that the tool originally had, nice long strokes, and get that cutting edge nice and fresh and shiny. Get it nice and sharp. I can't reiterate, we really want these tools nice and sharp, because as we're working and swinging that tool, the easier it cuts, the faster and the smoother that it cuts, the more efficient our work is and the safer it is for us to use. Of course, you're looking to see if that metal's getting rusty. A light coat of some sort of oil or fat on the tool will keep the tools from rusting. When you get finished using the tool, you're going to rinse it off, wipe it down so that it's dry, and then apply that layer of oil or that thin layer of fat on it to prevent the tool from rusting. If you've got some way of covering those sharp edges, maybe with a small piece of old fire hose or something that you can cover those cutting edges when they're stored. That would be great to do, and we'll talk about tool storage more a little later. Of course, you want to look these tools over as your fire season starts to begin, right? As the dry season comes, as you're moving at the end of the rainy season, at the end of your wet season, that's when you want to start getting your tools out and looking, getting prepared for what you know is coming. You know that fire season is coming. That's the time that we get our tools out, get them sharpened up, and get ready for the upcoming fire season, right? The next group of tools that we're going to talk about are scraping tools. These are very similar to some of the cutting tools that we looked at. They don't have quite as a thick, aggressive, sharp cutting edge, but we're still going to sharpen the edges. Basically, every tool that we use, I'm going to tell you to sharpen the edge on it, even down to a shovel, and I'll talk about that in a little bit when we get there. But these scraping tools, we're moving any loose materials off the surface of the ground so that we can scrape that vegetation away. And there's a bunch of different types or a bunch of different styles with some names that may not mean a whole lot to you. But take a look at the style once again and see, what you can come up with locally here. A shovel, right? A shovel is I mentioned is a tool that we can use. A firefighting shovel has a little bit different angle to the head than a shovel that you would typically use for digging in the dirt. And you think, well, what can we use a shovel for? Well, when we use this shovel, we're going to sharpen the edges on this thing. We're going to sharpen all the way up to the tip here. We're going to sharpen all the way out here so that this is nice and sharp. With that nice sharp shovel, and the shovel's a little bit flatter, we can use that shovel for a lot of different things. We can swing the sharp edges of that shovel to cut down the vegetation. We can use it to remove these light limbs from the trees. With that nice sharp cutting edge, we could cut those limbs off of the trees to reduce the fuel load. Of course, with the shovel, we can dig with it. We could dig a trench. We can grab loose soil and throw loose soil over top of the fire. Now, just sort of being familiar with the vegetation in the area that this guy's in, this road that he's standing on is going to be pretty densely packed. It's going to be some hard packed dirt. But if we could imagine that this was some loosely packed soil, okay, this guy can turn around with this shovel and just throw some of this dirt right on the bank where it's burning here and snuff that fire right out. So a lot of times folks don't think about that shovel so much, but shovel's really a good tool there that we could use in the wildland, in the bushfires. This particular tool here, it's a McLeod, a McLeod. There's a couple different ways you can pronounce it. What's interesting about this one is that it has these really big, it's got a nice wide head with a flat scraping area, but then it also has these big teeth on it that can be used like a rake and that can pull clumps of vegetation away. So once again, we're going to keep this nice and sharp. This top edge here, we're going to keep nice and sharp. So you could use that for cutting grass or vegetation, and then flip it over and use these tines on here to pull the big clumps of say grass or something, pull those loose and out of the way. So once again, take a look at this. Could you get a flat piece of metal and get someone with a torch to cut these teeth into it for you, and make some sort of a tool like this that you're going to attach to some sort of a handle, right? What can you do to fashion some sort of a tool like this? This tool is a combination tool. It's very similar to some of the small, what we would call an entrenching tool that are used in some militaries throughout the world. An entrenching tool has a much shorter handle to it. But this particular tool, we call it a combination tool. There's a little knob here at the bottom, and this knob, we can loosen that, and that lets us rotate this head. It folds back and forth, so we can fold it. We can use it in this configuration here. You can see it's got a sharpened edge here. It's actually got a serrated, almost like a saw blade edge here. You can use it like a digging tool. You can use it like a small shovel. You can use it like a saw. You can, this pick on the end of it, you can use to dig up roots, to pry up plants. And then you can fold this in a couple of different combinations. At the same time, I don't find this tool particularly useful. The head's a little bit small for me. As with a lot of tools that have a lot of different uses, as opposed to a single use, sometimes they aren't really good at, they're useful for a lot of different things, but they're not really good at any single thing. So combination tool, interesting tool. If you want to try to use or find something like this, like I said, this is a sort of a takeoff of those military entrenching tools. If you could find something like that, modify it with a longer handle. Sort of general safety with hand tools. You can see this fella here's got his there's his combination tool folded up in a little bit different configuration where he doesn't have the pick end sticking out, but he's working out on the line. Snap that handle off. So once again, as we inspect these tools, keeping those handles in good shape. And again, I've seen so many tool handles. Of course, we buy these specially made, wooden handles that are turned on a lathe, and I see a lot of your tool handles, you're using naturally small trees or branches. Inspect them the same way, treat them the same way as a manufactured handle. Check them for cracks and things like that. Keep them nice and smooth for the hands so that you're not getting blisters as you're working. Whatever type of oil you might use to treat wood, thin coat of oil on that to help keep the wood from getting too dried out so that it cracks. And then, safety as you're working, and in this class, we're talking about hand crews of 20 men, and we line up we line up 20 people, and we're marching them out through the woods. Look at just the picture that we've got here. You can see mountainous terrain, and we're marching these 20-man hand crews out through the woods. And how do you proceed like that? We're trying to keep a decent space between us. Keep about 3 meters of space between your guys. Everyone walks in and I say guys, I mean guys, gals, men, women, whoever you've got. I'm just to be clear on that. Maybe 3 meters of space in between. Everybody carries the tool on the same side of their body. If you're walking on a hill, we want you to carry that tool in your hand. You're going to find the balance point, of your tool, so you can carry it with less fatigue. You're going to keep the tool all on the same side. You're going to hold it if you're walking on a hillside. You're going to hold that tool on the downhill side, so that if you lose your footing, you can let that tool go out away from your body, so that you don't fall on the tool and cut yourself. You're always keeping in mind where that sharp cutting edge is at. You're keeping it away from your body, keeping it away from the bodies of the other people. If you're passing someone with a tool, let them know that you're passing them on your left, on your right, however you would normally say that, amongst yourselves. Let somebody know so that you're not surprising anybody. When you're not using the tool, don't just lay it down. Be sure you're setting it down somewhere that you don't misplace it. Be cautious of that cutting edge, that you're not getting that cutting edge, damaged when you're setting it down or something like that. So just sort of some general tools there, tool safety tips. Okay. Notice, he's wearing gloves. I know that a lot of you don't have access to the full kit that he's wearing. If we look at him, right, he's got the hard hat, safety glasses, gloves. He's wearing the fire-resistant shirt, pants. He's got what we call a line pack, that he's carrying extra gear and things with him. We'll talk about this in later classes, but, wear something made of natural fiber, cover as much skin as you can, some kind of gloves. Get some kind of gloves on your hands made of a natural fiber or a leather. When you're working with these sharp tools, be sure you've got some gloves on. Okay. I already touched on this. I'm not gonna, hammer on this topic too much, but just a little bit better picture. You see how he's sitting there. He's got that tool locked against his legs there, and he's using that large, wide file to sharpen up the tool head. If you have a couple of these files, having those handy when you take a break, typically what we'll do, a lot of us will carry one of those files in our pack. We've got one of those in our pocket in our pack all the time when we're out on the fire. If we sit down to take a 5 or 10-minute break, we're pulling that file out and we're resharpening the edge of our tool, keeping our tool sharp all the time. Big priority for us. Maybe it goes without saying, don't take your bare finger and test how sharp you've got that edge, right? Be careful how you're testing that edge for sharpness. Don't use your bare fingers to do that. General storage of the tools. Of course, here, oh boy, folks spend a lot of money buying all sorts of custom made brackets and clamps and things to store your hand tools on your equipment, and that could, boy, you could waste a lot of money doing that. So let's break this down to like what's the best way to store it, right? If you've got some means of something to protect the blades, the sharp edges, come up with something to cover those sharp edges. When you're storing your tools, store them all with the handles facing one direction, the heads facing the other direction if you can, so no one's reaching for the tool and getting cut on those sharp edges. Sure, it'd be great if you could, somehow strap them down or clamp them down in your fire trucks. The big thing is we don't really want to mix those tools in our seating areas where we ride. We would prefer to have them in a separate compartment somewhere else if you can. It's just a lot of common sense. Be cautious how you're storing them so that you don't get hurt reaching for them, so that you don't get damage them as they're being transported, right? There's a little section here that talks about how to store them if you're going to hop in a helicopter for a ride. I think we can skip over that for most of you guys, right? But it's all just common sense, right? Of course, when we do these classes, we always have little quizzes. What's the name of this tool that we've got here? And this is the combination tool. Of course, something you guys probably aren't going to use a whole lot of. What's it used for? It's an all-purpose tool, so we can use it for digging, cutting, trenching, grubbing, all sorts of different things. Primarily a digging tool. You can use it for scraping, smothering, cutting, all sorts of stuff. Okay. When it says working in between rocks, that's sort of an interesting use for this sort of pick end here. If you have some kind of a tool that's just like a sharp poking tool. That works well for picking up like some leaves and vegetation, some broad leaves. If you've got a bunch of dried broad leaves that you want to move, that you can just sort of poke stuff with. So that's what it means. It says, work well between rocks if you need to get some dried vegetation out from between rocks. Now we're going to move into what we sort of call common equipment, but I think the reality of it is that this is maybe a little bit uncommon equipment for you guys, but maybe something to get you thinking about some other tools that you could maybe use or integrate into your firefighting. So, of course, we've got a chainsaw there. We'll talk about chainsaws in a little bit. First, what we're going to move through, here we go. Here's our chainsaws, right? So the big thing that I want to emphasize with a chainsaw is to be sure you know what type of fuel to run in your chainsaw. I consistently see this as a problem when I travel, is that folks are running these chainsaws with straight petrol. And these are two-stroke engines. I taught a class earlier in the year about small engines. We talked about the difference between a two-stroke and a four-stroke engine. But you've got to be mixing oil in with your petrol when you run these tools. It's critical. It's the only way that the engine gets lubrication. So be sure you're using the right fuel for that. A chainsaw will run on straight petrol, and you may get a number of uses out of it before it quits. But I promise you, running straight petrol for long enough in a chainsaw will destroy it. So be sure you're using the right fuel. Chainsaw we have a whole separate class that we teach just for chainsaw use. It's our S212 Wildland Fire chainsaws. We classify folks that can run a chainsaw. We call them sawyers, and there's 3 different levels of a sawyer in skill level. Using a chainsaw can be very dangerous in the fire environment. When it's smoky, visibility isn't good. So be extremely cautious when you're using a chainsaw. But a chainsaw can make short work of removing vegetation, of course, cutting trees and brush that may be in your way. So very good tool to have when you're dealing with the bushfires. Be extra cautious when you're using it. Something that we would never run chainsaws without. We've got these safety chaps this guy's wearing. You can see this guy's wearing them as well. These are chaps that are made out of, they've got long, thin fibers of Kevlar, which is the material that like a bulletproof vest is made out of. You've got these long, thin strands in there. And when the teeth on the chainsaw with that spinning chain, if that touches your leg, it pulls all of these thin little strings out, wraps them around the sprocket back here in the chainsaw, and stalls the saw and keeps you from hurting yourself, keeps you from cutting your leg off. I don't know how readily available they are. I have never seen a pair of chainsaw chaps in my travels in Africa. But boy, it's a great piece of safety equipment. If you ever see them and can get your hands on them, it's a great piece of safety equipment to have. The next couple of things we're going to talk about are these various small portable pumps. And I don't know that these are necessarily readily available for you all, so I'm just going to kind of move over these pretty quickly. But I want to make you aware that things like this are out there, and get you thinking, are there some form of an irrigation pump or something that's commonly used in your area that, maybe you could get your hands on? Having a small portable pump could be advantageous when you're dealing with a bushfire somewhere, right? So there's a couple different kinds here. Once again, we have a whole course. This is our S211 class. It's wildland portable pumps. It's a great class as well. Teaches you all about how to calculate friction loss and how to choose which pump to use. This guy's using a little two-stroke or a little two-stroke high pressure lightweight portable pump. This produces, low flow but sort of a high pressure. It's good for charging these small thin lines that we use when we fight fire out in the bush. Couple of different versions here and some of the trade names. This is a Mark III pump. This is the Wick 375 pump. Here we can order these pumps. We have what we call a cache that stores all sorts of tools and stuff for us. And if we've got a big fire, we can call the cache and order these kits. They come with the pump. You can see it's got a little dam here, a little catch basin to put the thing in so that we don't spill any petrol into the water supply. Comes with a fuel can, comes with everything that you need. These are also two-stroke pumps. Hearing protection is critical when you're running these things. Two-stroke engines like to run at high RPMs. They're very loud and noisy. We're using these to directly supply a hose with water to apply to the fire. So these are sort of small, lightweight, but high pressure, low volume, high pressure for using as fire suppression, right? They make these floating pumps. A floating pump here, the interesting thing, a lot of these floating pumps are four-stroke. So you don't need to mix any oil in with your petrol when you're running one of these. What's different about these, the previous pumps that we were looking at use a suction hose. A hard suction hose is attached to it, and you drop that suction hose into your water supply. These portable floating pumps don't have that. So the intake is right underneath. It floats on the surface of the water. You attach your hose over here on this end. Really interesting. These are going to flow high volumes of water at low pressure. So we wouldn't use a floating pump to directly supply a hose to put water on the fire. We're going to use this floating pump. It's a volume pump. So we're going to use this to refill a fire truck. We're going to use this to refill a cistern that we may be using to supply us with water. Or if we have some sort of a portable water tank, we're going to use this type of pump for that. Just a different version of a volume pump here. Once again, this is going to be a four-stroke petrol only volume pump. So this one's got your suction hose with a strainer that's going to attach here on this side and go down into the water supply. Once again, same uses as the last pump. We're going to use this for refilling the fire trucks or refilling some sort of other stationary water supply. We didn't discuss this because I don't think that it's all that relevant. The particular pumps that we use here, the two-stroke pump, the Mark II, the Wick 37 or Mark III, the Wick 375, they run at a 1:24 or a 24-to-1 ratio for the mixed fuel. If you're using any two-stroke item, typically the fuel cap will tell you the mix ratio that you need to use for that. The last couple of things here are what they call alternative tools. And I have to chuckle because what we would consider here as alternative tools are going to be the tools that you guys probably going to use sort of the most and maybe more readily available for you to use. So everything is the same with these. The maintenance will be the same, sharpening them, all the same. We have this rake here. We call this a council rake. It basically what this is, and I'm not as familiar with your agricultural practices, but here in the U.S., this is a sickle, what we would call a sickle bar, and these teeth go on a long bar that you attach to a tractor, and this long bar sort of slides back and forth and uses it to cut, wide swaths of vegetation along like steep banks or something like that. And what we do, this is just a piece of that sickle bar gets cut off and mounted onto a handle. And we keep these teeth sharp. These teeth are beveled at a 45-degree angle. And we keep those nice and sharp. And you can use this like a rake to pull away vegetation. You can also, because the teeth are sharp, you can use that to cut vegetation as well. So, do you have something like this that you could use? These, I mean, they sell these. We can, most everyone here buys them already set up like this, but in my old department, we would make these as well. We would cut a piece of sickle bar. These teeth are just riveted onto a piece of angle iron, right? You've got a piece of angle iron. This is your angle iron, like this. And then we'll get one of these little teeth, put it on here, pop a rivet here, pop a rivet here. Then we're going to take a piece of pipe, weld a piece of pipe, short little section of pipe. We're going to weld right here, okay? And then we weld that, weld, there's my welding sound effects, okay? I'm going to weld the pipe onto here, and then we're going to stick a wood handle in there, and we've just made this tool, okay? If you don't have these teeth like this, cut a piece of metal in a triangular shape, sharpen these edges at a 45-degree angle. You've made the homemade version of the council rake. Now, this next one, this is something I want you guys absolutely to make these if you don't have something like this. So we call this a fire swatter. And I've seen some versions of these in my travels in Africa. You can build these. I built, look, the last department I came from an American perspective, we were kind of poor, right? We were fabulously wealthy compared to what you see, right? But we tried to save money when we could. This hunk of rubber right here is do you call it a mud flap? We call it a mud flap, right? On the back of a truck, on a trailer, right? You've got these hanging off the back of the truck. You get that hunk of rubber, piece of metal, piece of pipe, handle, right? Maybe some, we call them hog rings, or wire piece of rubber on there. You could do this with like a rubber floor mat, right? A rubber floor mat, and somehow attach what we want. We want to attach a big hunk of rubber or something sort of heavy that doesn't burn onto a stick, okay? This will be, for the vegetation that a lot of you guys are dealing with, this is going to be super effective. Now, they call it a fire swatter. And yes, you could take this and use it to hit the flames, but the more effective way to use this, if you look in this picture, the way the fire's burning here along this edge, I'm going to walk up, I'm going to take this rubber mud flap and I'm going to just lay it flat against on top of the fire, and I'm just going to drag it, slowly drag it across the edge of that fire, and it's going to go right out. Okay, fire beater, some places call it. I see in the chat. Exactly, but don't beat the fire with it. Use it to drag it over top of the fire, smother the fire. This is a soup. Look, make one of these. If you make these. I can't repeat that. You make it floor mat, welcome mat from your house, right? Whatever you've got, this is going to be a great tool for you. They have different names, different shapes they come in, right? But awesome tool here, okay? And then just rakes, like any kind of a rake. These have become very trendy here recently for whatever reason. Everybody's using this collapsible rake. It kind of folds up, but this is, we call it like a leaf rake, a garden rake, whatever you call it. Lots of thin little tines, works great. Here, this little one, they call it like a monkey paw or a shrub rake. All they did with this is they cut the handle off of a bigger rake so that you can stick it down in your pack and carry it with you. Whatever. Find some sort of a rake with these type of long tines on it. Another great tool. Just grab a rake. Great fire tool, right? Probably one of the only tools we don't sharpen the edge on, right? Now, we've got all of these different specialty tools. Everybody manufactures a different version of these things. But you look at sort of the general shape of it, right? What can you guys use tools shaped like this in agriculture all the time. And whatever that head's made out of, I've seen these heads made out of stone, right? Like that works. Some sort of handled tool with like a wide shape on the end of it. This thing's got a ridiculously large one. Man, they like to just change the shape a little bit and sell it to firemen as the newest, latest, greatest tool. Get some kind of hunk of metal and hammer it into this shape. Like you guys can craft this stuff out of locally available materials, no problem. Just different names. This one's the same as the last tool I circled, but they've made some weird sharp things on the edge of it. Whatever, different shapes. Just take a look at the different shapes of the tools. What do you think would work for you? How could you make some? Look, this is a hunk of metal that's bent a little bit. Nothing magic here to these tools. Now, this is interesting. This we're talking about, historical, a gunny sack, a burlap bag. I don't know what you guys would, if you would call it the same thing. This is some sort of a woven natural fiber. And look, when you've got a bushfire, right, you've got people from the community trying to put the fire out like this, right? They're using some sort of heavy blanket or something. They're swatting, beating at the fire with this. Some type of a heavy duty cloth. If you can get it wet so that you've got that moist cloth, you can use it to beat at the fire, or use it like I was telling you to use that fire swatter or that fire beater, where you just drag that damp wet cloth over top of the edge of the fire to smother it out. That's a pillowcase, a cotton pillowcase, and then with these burlap bags, these are bags that you would buy historically. Here you would buy grain in them. Now, I don't know, some of your grain bags are probably made of plastic, so that's not going to work all that well. If you've got some sort of natural fibered grain bag, those are great to use for this. So just another option there for some sort of a smothering tool, right? And then this last one that we've got here, I think this is sort of my last slide here. Now, this one they're talking about in Alaska. They're talking about, a spruce bough. But here's what we're talking about, right? Some sort of green, very green vegetation that's not going to easily burn. You can use as that smothering tool to drag over the fire, to use it like a rake or a broom. Heck, even using a broom to sweep vegetation out of the way as the fire's moving, right? Could be. So what type of tree or plant do you have locally that you could break off a branch, break off, the top of it, and use that as some sort of a tool? This seems like a great option as well for you. This sort of an overview of the tools that we use here. Did we hit our objectives? Yeah, look, don't worry about what I called these things. Whatever you call them locally, find those agricultural tools. And then, based on the fuel type and the ground cover that you've got, think of the task as we're trying to clear this area to plant, right? What tool would we use? You know, pretty simple. Keep things sharp. I think I think I talked pretty well about how to maintain them. Smooth handles, some type of oil to treat the wood, some type of keep the rust off of the heads, right? Some type of oil or fat to prevent it from rusting. We talked about carrying the tools, you know, passing the tools. If you're handing that tool off to someone else, you know, make sure they're ready for it. Tell them ahead of time that you're passing it to them. Watch the sharp edge as you're passing it back and forth. We talked about the spacing, you know, stay a tool's length away from everyone as you're using the tools, as you're working with them. Be smart, use common sense when you're storing the tool somewhere. I think we did it. I think we covered all of the topics fairly well. I didn't see a whole lot of questions in the chat. We're kind of up against our time for our hour that we like to keep folks at. So at this time, I'm going to end sort of the formal part of our training, and thank you all for attending and being here and taking the time out of your schedules to join us today. I would encourage you, please stick around. I have a lot of questions for you all. I want to hear what you're using. I want to hear you guys talk about how you could put these tools together. So please stick around for our tea time. For those of you that are attending later online, thank you for taking the time to attend our class. Invite your friends. We will see you all again next week.